On the day the last Soviet soldier crossed the border out of Afghanistan in 1989, a CIA operative cabled a simple, triumphant message to headquarters. "We won." It was a judgment that would prove to be not only premature, but a staggering historical delusion. For 20 years, 3 successive American administrations, Bush, Obama, and Trump, would repeat the same mistake, presiding over history as most expensive. Self-licking ice cream cone, a $2 trillion bureaucracy that existed to sustain itself through distorted data and discarded lies. How did the world's mightiest military spend 2 decades chasing an enemy it had supposedly defeated in the first 2 months? Why did the U.S. government shovel $143 billion into a nation-building project that was more expensive than the Marshall Plan, only to leave behind a failed state? Today, we deconstruct the shadow archives of the Lessons Learned project to reveal the secret history of the Afghan War, the 20-year lie. To understand why the Afghan War never truly ended, we have to go back to 1979. The U.S. strategy was not born out of a desire to help the Afghan people, but out of a cold-blooded Cold War calculus. Under President Jimmy Carter, the explicit purpose of aiding Afghan insurgents, the Mujahideen, was to induce a Soviet military intervention. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski saw an opportunity to give the USSR its own Vietnam quagmire. The U.S. and its partners in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into radical Islamist groups, viewing them as surrogate soldiers. From the perspective of the system at the time, this was a masterpiece of covert action. The U.S. prevented the Soviets from pacifying Afghanistan without losing a single American life. But this raging bout of victory disease made policymakers stupid. They focused so intently on destroying the Soviet Union that they exacerbated Islamic radicalism and underwrote Pakistan's transformation into a nuclear-armed quasi-rogue state. Robert Gates later confessed that while they expected post-Soviet Afghanistan to be ugly, they never considered it would become a global incubator for terrorism. Operation Cyclone was like starting a forest fire to stop an approaching army. The fire stopped the army, but then the arsonists went home, leaving the woods to burn for a decade until the smoke eventually reached their own front door on September 11th. In the immediate wake of 9/11, President George W. Bush promised the American people a defined mission and clear objectives, declared that the U.S. did not do nation building. Both of these statements were false. Leaked internal memos, or snowflakes, from Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld show that within months, he was privately warning that the mission was drifting. General Dan McNeill, the commander in 2002, admitted there was no campaign plan. The military was operating in the dark, often using decades-old British maps. Within the military high command, General Tommy Franks argued that he had solved the problem by defeating al-Qaeda and did not believe the poverty or governance of Afghanistan was his responsibility. However, academic experts like Barnett Rubin pointed out a fatal taste of victory that led to a massive strategic error, treating the Taliban and al-Qaeda as the same, the original sin. In December 2001, as the Taliban collapsed, their leaders offered to surrender and retire to private life. The Bush administration, eager for total victory, refused to talk. By excluding the Taliban from the political settlement at the Bonn Conference, the U.S. essentially signed a contract for 20 years of war. This was not a war against an ideology. It was a war against a population that had been told it had no place in the new order. By early 2002, the U.S. national security establishment was already drunk on its Iraq experience. Afghanistan was pushed to the back burner, becoming what soldiers called a backwater second effort. Statistics show the cost of this neglect. Rumsfeld imposed a hard cap of roughly 10,000 troops, forcing commanders to wage war on a shoestring while the insurgency began to regroup. Senior officials admitted they didn't have the foggiest notion of what they were undertaking. Path dependence. Because the U.S. had already committed to regime change in Iraq, the Afghan war became a victim of path dependence. The military could not afford to lose in Afghanistan, but it wouldn't commit the resources to win. This resulted in an economy of force mission where the goal was not to succeed, but simply to not lose, while the real war happened in Baghdad. The most significant strategic failure of the war was the inability or refusal to solve the riddle of Pakistan. To sustain the war, Washington needed Pakistani supply lines, yet Pakistan's powerful spy agency, the Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, was the primary patron of the Taliban. Inside the ISI, a unit known as Directorate S, or S-Wing, was tasked with secret operations to support violent Islamist radicals. General Mahmoud Ahmed, the ISI chief, embodied this contradiction. He played tennis and read Stephen Hawking, yet he was the paymaster for the Taliban. Former Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad argued that Pakistan's double game was undeniable. Pakistan concluded that the U.S. would eventually leave, as it did in 1989, and they needed their own horses, the Taliban, to prevent an Indian-allied government from ruling in Kabul. U.S. officials were, collectively, played like pawns by the ISI. The agency poured $10 billion in aid into Pakistan, essentially financing the very insurgency that was killing American soldiers. It was a geopolitical protection racket. Having promised to avoid nation building, the U.S. inadvertently embarked on history's most expensive attempt at it. The results were a tsunami of well-intentioned governmental and non-governmental organizations that delivered almost nothing. The Obama administration tripled aid, pumping roughly as much money into the country as its entire economy could produce. One USAID official likened it to pouring water into a funnel too fast. The water didn't go through. It just flooded the ground. The doorknob. U.S. engineers built a glass atrium police headquarters in a remote province, only to find the local police chief couldn't open the door because he had never seen a doorknob. The ditch diggers. The U.S. paid Afghan workers $5 a day for manual labor, nearly triple the salary of a schoolteacher. Consequently, teachers quit their jobs to dig ditches, effectively dismantling the education system the U.S. was trying to build. The bridge loop. One Afghan firm had a brother in the Taliban. The Taliban brother blew up a bridge, and the American government paid the other brother to rebuild it. Over and over, U.S. auditors concluded that 90% of the money spent was overkill. In 2007, Afghanistan ranked 172nd out of 179 on the Corruption Index. Instead of a state, the U.S. built a kleptocracy system where high-ranking officials used U.S. fuel and supply contracts to build poppy palaces in Kabul while stashing millions in Dubai. As the war entered its second decade, the U.S. government shifted from fighting the Taliban to fighting the truth. John Sokko, a special inspector general, called it an odor of mendacity that permeated every level of government. Memos reveal that officials at the White House and military headquarters in Kabul routinely distorted statistics to make it appear the U.S. was winning. The self-licking ice cream cone effect. If insurgent attacks went up, the military said it was because they were taking the fight to the enemy. If attacks went down, it was proof that the Taliban were on the run. General Petraeus boasted about good numbers of kills to Congress, knowing he was only going to be in theater for a year and needed a formula that held things together long enough to leave. This data-driven hubris reached a lethal peak in the kill chain, relying on the unblinking eye of drone video, which often had a resolution equal to the legal definition of blindness. The U.S. began mowing the grass by killing anyone who fit a pattern of life. In one instance, a high-tech task force spent weeks tracking a cell phone they believed belonged to a Taliban leader. They bombed a civilian convoy, killing a local politician campaigning for election. The intelligence was purely electronic. The targeters had ignored the fact that the man was covered in election posters. By 2014, the U.S. held a ceremony in Kabul to mark the end of combat operations. It was a grand illusion. The U.S. military simply renamed the mission and continued the fight. The Afghanistan War became a humbling case study in the limits of American power. The U.S. machine was built to win conventional wars and negotiate treaties. It was never equipped to build governance in a violent, impoverished landscape. The generational trap. Major Stephen Boson predicted in 2007 that his children would be doing the same mission when they grew up. He was right. The U.S. behaving as if it had no choice, but to remain in a state of permanent war was the final lie. The 20-year Afghan war ended as it began in chaos and a failure of understanding. We must ask, why does the U.S. undertake actions so clearly beyond its abilities? There are viable paths for change. Structural reforms in how the military accounts for, victory and an end to the bourne classified legal shields that hide dysfunction from Congress are essential. Initiatives like the Lessons Learned Project suggest a desire for truth, but only if that truth is released while the war is still being fought, not 20 years too late. We are left with the question, who truly won the Afghan war? If we measure by the trillions of dollars spent and the lives lost, the answer is nobody. But if we measure by the endurance of the shadow state and its ability to sustain a 20-year lie, the machine itself is the only victor. Is it possible to stop a system that no longer requires our permission to function? Or are we destined to watch the same script unfold in the next theater of the forever war?